Welcome back, everybody, to another Art of War stream, and this is the latest and greatest update to the Know Thy Enemy series, in which I will be talking about the brand new Tau Mont'Ka detachment. It is my personal favorite detachment in the new Tau book, and basically if this existed at WCW, you'd be looking at a champion here, if I wasn't sick. But this detachment basically plays like my exact kind of WCW board control, objective contesting Tau, tries to delay you in the early game, overwhelms you with breachers and lots of stuff you're not ready to deal with, and it does so if you ramp it up to 1,000. It just does it in the absolute perfect ways. I couldn't have written a better detachment to do what I wanted to do than whoever wrote this one, so kudos to you, sir. You get credit for this because it is a fantastic set of rules, and it really amplifies everything that an aggressive Tau build wants to be able to do. So this is one you're going to have to know. I think it is going to be the strongest detachment, although Retaliation Cadre will still be quite popular. And if you haven't checked it out, last week I went ahead and did a Know Thy Enemy on that detachment. So if you want to see what a pure battlesuit, or mostly battlesuit army is going to look like, it's probably going to be in that detachment. This one is very much focused on the Breachers, Devilfish, Fish of Fury, the old style. It is back, it's stronger than ever, and I think it's going to be staying in the meta for quite a while because the tools you get in the detachment, especially the stratagems and the enhancements, really open up a lot of different ways to, outplay people with Tau. And that's exactly what you're looking for in a good detachment. So I'm going to break down all the ways that this detachment operates and then talk about some of the ways to try and mitigate its strengths. But you need to know this detachment whenever Tau get an MFM and are legal to play, then this one's going to be all over the tournament scene, in my opinion. Okie doke. So let's go ahead and dive in here. First of all, their detachment rule is the killing blow. Mont'Ka is all about movement. It's about, going in at a single point and just dealing devastating damage, with your opponent having little recourse in return. And if you haven't checked it out, I've already played a couple games with Mont'Ka into Chaos Demons as well as Adeptus Custodes. So if you want to check those out, very good games, very good demonstrations of how strong this detachment is. So Killing Blow gives you access to first battle round, second battle round, third battle round. So it's the opposite of Kalyan. Kalyan was, and still is if you take that detachment, battle round 3, 4, and 5, which turn 2 is critical. Turn 2 is the setup one. Turn 2 is where if you can threaten to put a lot of pressure on your opponent, they can play a lot more defensive, allowing you to have a much more easy and favorable middle game. And turns 3, that's the critical turn. Now you do get Kalyan, but you only get for that turn. Whereas this detachment, if your opponent tries to overload you turns 1 and 2, which is very typical of like Chaos Knights, Orcs, some of the tougher armies for Tau to deal with based on win rates, then you actually get your key army rule active during those turns. And I think this is going to be a big deal for Tau, because one of the ways you could lose is you would just fall behind on points. Tau isn't the killiest faction in the game, although there are some units that are extremely killy. But typically, especially previously before the Codex, it was killy in, I have a 6-man crisis unit with Mass Cyclic with a commander in there that can kill anything in the game. And it could split fire to some amount, but it would kill itself over the course of the early turns as soon as you activated it. And in addition, Tau take a really nasty split fire penalty. So if you were MSU with a lot of durable units like a Chaos Knights, then it wasn't that efficient to split fire and try and kill multiple. You could, but you were losing a lot in return. So Mont'Ka is not going to be like that. Mont'Ka is going to give you access to lethal hits on your range weapons during those first 3 battle rounds. And while sustained is stronger for Tau, in my opinion, having lethals in the early game just helps a lot of Tau units punch up and become a bit more reliable into monsters and vehicles. Tau only have a handful of weapons that are designed to actually kill those targets, like Broadside's Heavy Rail Rifle, Hammerheads, you got Sky Rays, Seeker Missiles in general. But outside of that, a lot of stuff can be inconsistent into tanks. There's a lot of Strength 9, Strength 8, and downwards. And there's a lot of wounding on 5s. So with that, lethal hits really helps those volume of fire weapons that has a good damage characteristic and good AP, but didn't have the strength to really necessarily get through enough saves on the opponent. Lethal hits really helps with that. And then while the unit's guided, and this is just a totally separate sentence, I am not sure if this is supposed to follow under the qualifier of the first, second, and third battle rounds, because the first sentence very obviously does. The second sentence is entirely different and just is free-floating out there. It says, while a unit is guided, has its ranged weapons guided, they gain assault as well. So doesn't say during the first 3 turns, or during while the killing blow, while the lethal hits is active, the killing blow part of it. I don't know. It is very possible, like rules as written, you can absolutely use it turns 4 and 5. You can absolutely get assault as it's written. Whether that's intended, we're going to find out whenever Tau gets an FAQ. But I've played it more conservatively in the games in that I don't get it on turns 4 and 5, although it's a massive boost if you do, of course. So I've been playing it more conservatively because I think it's intended, like Kalyan, to be restricted to the turns that the first part is. But who knows? If it's not, that's fantastic, because it means it's a more flexible rules design, and maybe they understand that having some of your key rules attached to only a couple battle rounds isn't the most fun, and it's good to have something that's active the whole game, even if it's not the whole rule. So it might very well be intended. We're gonna have to find out, but I want to put that qualifier there. Enhancements. Exemplar of the Mont'Ka lets the bearer's unit gain access to the Killing Blow detachment rule, battle round 4. Not 5, just 4. This is a pretty mediocre rule in my opinion. If the 6-man crisis unit still existed with a commander inside, then of course it's worth it to get it turn 4, because you're going to still be using that. This detachment doesn't have fire and fade or any such equivalent, and so your units, when they're sent out there, can die. They can die. They might not. Your opponent might do other stuff, but they can die. And so there's no guaranteed I'm keeping this unit alive and I'm going to get all the activations and value out of it. You can put this on a Fireblade, and then if you use a turn 4, you still get the lethal. But it's going in a Breacher squad, which already has assault, so, whatever. And it's just lethal hits. It's not the end of the world. The Sustain 2, obviously, in Kalyan is quite a bit stronger as a rule. So I don't think this is particularly good. I haven't put it in any of my lists. Strike Swiftly, on the other hand, I have put in all my lists. And that is, at the start of the battle, you pick 2 friendly Tau units. Just friendly Tau units, no restriction on it. Can be anything. Can be Devilfish, can be your broadsides, can be Riptides, can be a Storm Surge or a Taunar if you really wanted it to be. Can be whatever you want. As long as the unit doesn't have Scout natively, and which Devilfish do not, they only gain it through having Pathfinders inside. This is a new way to give your transport Scout or some other such units. And like I said, it really helps some of your immobile shooting, like broadsides, get up into a position of, you go go first, okay? Scout 6 up, right behind the ruin, so that when you pop out, you can get a clean line to your opponent's deployment zone. Stuff like that is going to be pretty popular. Or it just lets you stage turn 1 better behind those ruins. So I think it's a fantastic upgrade. It is on the pricier side, but still very, very strong. Strategic Conqueror is also very strong and cheaper. It's at the start of the first battle round, you pick 1 objective marker, and while friendly Tau models are on it, they get +1 OC. So this is really impactful because a Breacher team disembarking onto an objective with a good OC unit goes from 2 OC models to 3 OC models. So 20 OC for all 10 models would go to 30 OC. At that point, you're contesting any objective. That if you put those 10 bodies on there, it doesn't matter what your opponent has, you're taking away. 3 Chaos Knights, doesn't matter, boom, taken away. Very powerful. In addition, if the unit gets battle shocked, you go to 0, you modify your OC characteristic to 0 first, then you add 1 based on the rules commentary. So it means if you get battle shocked by Tyranids or something like that, you would still be OC 1. Now, you wouldn't be able to use strats because you're battle shocked, but you'd still have an OC. You'd have 1 OC because you'd go to 0 first and then +1. So it can be impactful in those cases. You can also, it's one of the cheeky ways to give Kroot Hounds OC. They just, normally they're 0 OC. If they're within 12 of a Kroot Shaper, they get +1 OC, but they could also use this to get a +1 OC. Then Coordinated Exploitation. While the bear is leading a unit, each time the unit is an observer. So once again, a character has to be in a unit, and that unit then has to observe. So there's only a handful of units that can even take this. The guided unit, so not that unit, but the one that it guides, gains Sustained 1 when targeting their spotted unit. It's a solid buff. If you want to run it, you can, but you're basically, once again, putting it on a Cadre Fireblade in a Breacher team, and then they're guiding something else, which can totally be impactful. I think it's actually pretty solid when using it on to guide a missile side unit. And if you happen to run Shadow Sun, you can already give the rerolls to the Breachers, and instead now you'll have access to you'll have reroll 1s to hit, so you'll be +1 ballistic skill, hitting on 3s, rerolling 1s. You don't really need full rerolls in that case, and then you get sustained 1. It's actually pretty decent there, but there aren't too many like huge volume of fire units that get efficiency from this. If it was sustained 2, that would be a different case, but it's sustained 1, so it's totally a fine upgrade if you're taking fire blades in Breacher teams, but I don't think it's necessary. I think the previous 2 are quite a bit more impactful. Then the stratagems. And this is where the detachment really stands out from the other several. Well, really Retaliation, Cadre, and Kalyan, not counting the crew detachment. It has good strats, it's just they're very restrictive of what they benefit. Stratagems. So, pinpoint counteroffensive, 1 CP. Any phase after a Tau unit dies that's not crew. So if it is a crew unit, it doesn't, but it doesn't exclude Vespid, which is an auxiliary but not a crew unit. And your 55-point Piranhas, your 90-point Breacher team, there's a variety of relatively cheap Tau units that you could run. And when one of them dies, you can then spend this stratagem, and until the end of the battle, any of your Tau units that target that unit get full rerolls to hit. And it's a battle tactic. So this is a great strat, obviously. Full rerolls against the target. There are some ways to manipulate it, which I'll talk about later, but for the most part, you want to have some amount of cheap stuff in your Mont'Ka list to proc this strat. Now, if something important dies and you still get to proc it, at the end of the day, you're still getting it. But for the most part, you want your first layer that's going to touch objectives and do things to be expendable, really, so that you can then proc this strat on it. And then all of your efficient shooting that pops out the next 2 turns does tons of damage to their key units. So this is a fantastic strat. It means this detachment is less reliant on Tetras than others, because Tetras give you full rerolls to hit against a target for a unit, whereas this, any of your units can keep shooting, and so it really benefits an MSU army as well. This strat is amazing. Then aggressive mobility is 1 CP, also a battle tactic. When you advance a Tau unit, +6 to their move characteristic. That's fantastic. So broadsides can just move 11 inches, and then in this detachment, advance and shoot because they gain assault. Breachers, disembark 3, move 12 inches, 15 inches of theoretical movement. Devilfish, 21-inch threat range with Breachers disembarking. And because they can advance and disembark from a Devilfish, that's its data sheet roll. So it's a lot of combos you can do with this. Now, Farsight makes a stratagem free and can only work on battle tactics thanks to the data slate, but it's a battle tactic. So you can use it on your broadsides to move 11 inches, prepare to shoot something, and then Farsight in his crisis unit can then use the strat for 0 CP and a second time and just go 16 inches and blow something else up. It's a very, very powerful strat. There's move blah, all sorts of things can be pulled off with this, and I'll talk a bit more about them in a bit, but it's fantastic. It is such a good stratagem. Wow. Flat 6 advance on any of those, like the contest plays you can do. You're just like, okay, I'm gonna park here, behind this ruin, in range of these objectives. Okay, your opponent tried to take them. Nope, I'm gonna press the 1 CP, it's contested, doesn't matter. And obviously this synergizes really nicely with being able to get units onto the Strategic Conqueror objective, where you'll get +1 OC. Then you have Focused Fire, 1 CP, battle tactic as well. Select 2 Tau units, they both gain +1 AP for ranged weapons against that target. They both have to shoot at that target, but +1 AP, there's a lot of AP1 in this book. Ignorance cover is pretty easy with the various observer units, but +1 AP for 2 units against a target, really, really good on missile sides, on breacher teams. Pathfinders benefit a lot for this. So there's a bunch of units that really quite like +1 AP. And I think it's a fantastic stratagem, and it's going to be used often. Combat Debarkation, also a battle tactic. Infantry unit that disembarked from a transport can reroll wounds against the closest eligible target. This effectively means that either Pathfinders can gain access to reroll wounds, which can combo with Focus Fire to get +1 AP on that, or more likely is that Breachers have the rule on their data sheet, if they shoot at a target on an objective, they reroll wounds, but only if they're on the objective. Now you can move up your devilfish, disembark, and be like, oh, you tried to be cheeky and stayed off of the objective? You're still dead. Reroll wounds against you. So it's a very good strat in that sense. Then Pulse Onslaught, 2 CP. This is by far the worst strat in this suite of stratagems. You pick 1 Tau, but it's still not like the end of the world, but 2 CP is too pricey for it. It should be 1 CP. 1 Tau infantry unit that hits a non-vehicle or monster unit. That enemy unit is -2 to their movement, advance, and charge rolls. So it's a nice debuff, can only be used by your infantry unit against, a limited set of targets. But if you really needed to stop your opponent from making a particular objective, you can go ahead and use this strat and it'll be effective. And then counter defensive systems is also 2 CP. 1 Tau unit gains -1 damage against ranged attacks for that phase. So, 2 CP, once again, a bit pricey. It's not a battle tactics. You can't make it free. That would be sweet on Farsight, but you can't. So you can use it on anything though. Taunar, Storm Surge, your Crutox Rampagers if you happen to run that. But it's probably going to be used on like a Riptide, a Devilfish, a Broadside unit, a variety of those type of units. I used it on Tetras in the game against Nick, and they survived the massive damage of the Lord of Change. It can get nutty how much -1 damage can be impactful. Like a lot of armies have high volume of fire for damage 2, D3, and 3 damage weapons. -1 damage really throws a wrench in those type of plans. Okay, what's the play style of Mont'Ka? So what are the main goals of your Mont'Ka list? It's a very aggressive and mobile version of Tau that is designed around killing things and controlling objectives, especially in the first 3 turns. This is an army that wants to get the action rolling because that's when it's at its most lethal, because it has lethal hits. The army rule means that Tau is very much a powerhouse in those first 3 turns, but it's not terrible turns 4 and 5, especially when it's killed a bunch of your key resources already. It doesn't have to be at its strongest. It needs to be at its strongest turns 1, 2, and 3 when the game, the positional aspect of the game is being decided. And so because of that, it is, in my opinion, quite a bit stronger than Kalyan. Sustain 2 is much better if you could just get that rule at any point, but these rules are better because you get them in the key turns of the game, in my opinion. The army constantly threatens to kill your most valuable assets while leaving multiple breacher teams in range to take back objectives or deny you points. So they either get up into the middle of the table and are staged there, or you took first, you got up there, they kill a lot of your stuff, and then they stage on your next layer and take away all your primary potential. So this army, because it can kill a lot of stuff in a turn and also contest objectives very easily, you use Strategic Conqueror to pick the objective that is going to be the hardest to control for most of the game, and you send breacher teams over in that direction. +1 OC, even if you don't kill your opponent off of it, you'll kill something or hurt something and then take the objective away, and then you put your big damage, your Riptides, your Broadsides, your Fusion, Crisis, Sunforged suits, you put that at the other objectives and you just blow up your opponent's key resources in those early turns. Mont'Ka really wants to create a big score disparity in the first 3 turns of the game. It can totally play a close game, turns 4 and 5. Tau have done that before, although they've done it from a losing position, but with lots of extra damage because of the benefits of Kalyan. Now, on the other hand, you want to create that big score differential because you are weaker in the later part of the game, but not, like tremendously so. So I think that if you want to stage in the middle to be able to keep giving your opponent 5s or potentially 0s, and while you're getting 10s to 15s. And if that happens 2-3 turns out of the game, you already have a big lead, because this army also plays tactical secondaries very well. Could do fixed if you wanted to, but Tau is CP hungry. You saw there's some really amazing strats here. I want to be gaining stratagems, or CP for stratagems, and so I definitely want to be taking tactical or building in tools like Solo Ethereals or Shadow Sun to try and regen some amount of command points. Those are less consistent than discarding, which is entirely consistent if you do, but that means you can take a fixed game plan if you wanted to. And then this army really wants you to start trading resources early, because there's a lot of damage. There's a spread of damage output in this army. There's a lot of anti-infantry, there's a lot of like marine equivalents, and then there's a lot of anti-tank depending on how you build your list. So you have a nice mix of damage all across, and it really is going to come down to, if you trade your cheap units early, they pick them up with their cheap units, you kill their cheap units, they get full rerolls to hit against your good units, their damage dealers then kill you. That's kind of how the system would work. Or if you put your big stuff out first, they then put their guns out first, use their tetras and whatever, try and do as much damage, and then when you respond, you'll kill maybe one or two of those pieces, but their infantry units are actually quite damaging this detachment, specifically the breacher teams with fireblades. And so even if they lose a broadside unit or some riptides, they're still going to be able to punch up against you. So it's a really flexible detachment. It's not reliant on like 6-man crisis unit plus character like the previous index version was, where that unit has to do a lot of work every single turn. This army can trade resources and still be effective into later turns, which is quite powerful, obviously. So what are you going to see in Mont'Ka lists? Commander Farsight is probably best here because there are 4 battle tactics. Now, realistically, you're almost certainly using aggressive mobility with him, which is the flat 6 advance to get it a second time, is totally worth it, obviously. The other ones are either he can't proc them or they're difficult, like he has to die in order to proc pinpoint counteroffensive. But there are plenty of instances where flat 6 advance on his units, especially because you want to rapid ingress him and his crisis unit in. So rapid ingress, then they're going to move 16 on your turn and get basically any angle that you want. So, and especially into melter range if you run Sunforge. So I think he's fantastic in this detachment, but he's pretty good in other ones too. Breacher teams plus Fireblades. You can run solo Breacher teams as well, but Fireblade amps their damage, and in this one, being able to get to Strength 6 AP2, very strong, and rerolling wounds on units not on an objective, also very strong. So a lot of benefits. I didn't really run Fireblades as many times in the Index, but in this detachment, they are money in the bank. Awesome. Devilfish, fantastic. Great transport, helps your units get up the table. Awesome. Crisis battle suits. If you want to run Sunforge, they're great in here. You can run the missile variants because +1 AP is also quite solid on them with the Enforcer Commander to give them some amount of defense. So there's options for your crisis suits. You could run Starsight if you really wanted to in a more horde-based meta as well. They gain a lot of value from this detachment too. Broadsides, you can run the heavy rails for anti-tank. You can run the missile sides because missile sides gain tremendous amount in this detachment. +1 AP really helps them punch through a lot of targets, and they have the best volume of fire of any of the more expensive units you can run. So they specifically work in this one. Heavy rails work anywhere. The missile sides particularly work best in this detachment because of focused fire. And they synergize really nicely with those breacher teams. Breachers get up close. Broadsides stay farther back, both get +1 AP against the target, shoot the broadsides first, and then if it dies, it's no longer an eligible target, so you can shoot whatever else you want, and if it's wounded, you finish it off with the breachers and it's totally fine. Riptides. You can run Triptide if you want to. You can run 1 Riptide, you can run 2, it doesn't really matter. Riptides fit in here fine. They're not the most explosive damage potential. They're totally inconsistent, but at the same time, lethal hits really does help them in the early game as well. And being able to advance and shoot them is nice in addition. They also really like the -1 damage strat if you happen to bank up CP. Pathfinders, awesome for helping your Devilfish scout up. Not as important in this detachment, so it leaves you the option to also infiltrate them with your recon drone, move block, stage, all that stuff. Farstalker's in the Trail Shaper. He lets you redeploy after knowing who's going first, his unit and another Kroot unit. So you can take him in a Farstalker unit, which infiltrates, so they all infiltrate, and then 1 just basic Farstalker unit. Both of them can block your opponent's deployment line. Say it's like Orso, these trucks, or some army that doesn't have too much fly. Just move block them there. If you happen to go second, you can either stay there and keep the move block, or you can go back behind the middle and move block them on your turn. You got plenty of options. It's a pretty good package. Then Dark Strider is fantastic in just any archetype for his 12-inch no-go zone. Okay, what are the greatest strengths of Mont'Ka? Well, you access its strongest abilities, so the detachment rule and focus fire is restricted to battle rounds 1 to 3. So you can't use the +1 AP battle round 4 and 5, but that's not as big of a deal, obviously. If the game is like, that's the thing, is like this army is going to force your opponent to use their units. Literally the perfect game is watching Nick play his Chaos Demons into it. He's like, all right, well, this is extremely scary. If I just stay out here for the 5 turns, I'm absolutely dead by turn 4, no questions asked, so I'm going to play conservative early. And I was just pushing the points button, denying him points, getting the points in return, and created a big score disparity because he played more conservative. If he played into my damage, then I would have done a lot of damage to him, and then scored a lot of points in the later part of the game because he didn't have anything left. So that's exactly what Mont'Ka is threatening to do. They can utilize the Strike Swiftly, the Pathfinders, the Trail Shaper plus Farstalkers to immobilize and move block opponents early, and that also allows them to very safely stage up key units like Breacher Fish and Broadsides, etc., Riptides in the middle of the table so that they're in easy range to do all the damage you need to on the following turns. This detachment really benefits immobile shooting platforms like Broadsides. 5-inch move and shoot, not particularly good. You can rapid ingress, then move 5. You've seen it. It's not particularly great. When you throw in advance and shoot and the potential of a flat 6 additional movement, so an 11-inch movement on Broadsides, all of a sudden they become a lot more appealing because you can get them into the fight, you can get them at better angles throughout the game, which means your opponent can't as easily play around their firepower and their threat range and mostly the angles they can actually access. So I think this is a big deal, and I'm a huge fan of it. Lethal hits means that most Tau units that don't have anti-tank, dedicated anti-tank, which is a good amount of them, actually punch up quite a bit in this archetype in those early turns. Aggressive mobility, what an amazing strat. It is incredible for primary denial because take a Devilfish, moves 12, right? And we can scout move it up, and then so turn 1 it can move 12, can advance, and we can flat 6 on that, so just move it 18 inches. Disembark 3 from it because its data sheet rule is you can advance and disembark, so a lot of synergy here. That's 21 inches. And then your Breachers shoot and blow something up while probably being on almost any of the objectives that are relevant. Sounds very good, and I've done it. You can check out those games. Mont'Ka is much less reliant on the Tetra, like I mentioned, which gives you full rerolls to hit if it's an observer, but only for that one thing that's being guided. So you can save points on them and get more resources that can do damage and other things. But I still think they're solid in this detachment because in the early turns, if your opponent still tries to threat overload you, you still got access to the full rerolls whenever you need it. And savvy opponents are going to try and limit the power of pinpoint counteroffensive, as we'll talk about in the next slide. So fantastic. Last is the access to -1 damage. Can be backbreaking for some armies on Riptides, on Devilfish, on Broadside units, where you're really going in expecting to kill the unit and you leave it on a couple wounds, and that is just not good. So it's not going to be used all the time, but because 2CP is decently pricey these days, but it can be very, very critical for keeping an extra resource alive that you didn't expect, and that could be the difference. Okay, some of its weaknesses. So pinpoint counteroffensive, this is the full reroll strat. It doesn't work if Kroot are destroyed, so if they go for the Trail Shaper plus Farstalker package of turn 1 move blocks, if you kill all that stuff, it's not going to proc this strat, which is a big deal because it's not that cheap. And who knows what the actual points are going to be, but it's not complete, it's not a free trade that you're making. It's not like literally dirt cheap. So if you're doing this, they're not going to also proc pinpoint counteroffensive because that's what I want. I want my turn 1 move blocks or my turn 1 objective controllers to, if they die, be able to proc this strat. So I haven't been running the Kroot package because of this, but I still think it's good in the detachment. It's just if you run it, you're not getting the double power of, okay, you're move blocking them and your opponent has to kill them so that you get this strat. It's not the double bonus of that. If you use Pathfinders, it is, but Pathfinders are obviously quite a bit more expensive and can't be first turn redeployed back. after you know who's going first, can't be redeployed back. In Kalyan, you can redeploy them back. It's just you wouldn't know who's going first yet, which is obviously completely detrimental to doing it in the first place. A savvy player, if you're smart, and you're going to see this from like top players, is they're going to try and split fire their strongest units such that something else that's lesser, less important, is going to finish your units off. So like I put a prawn on objective. Okay, they can just kill it with, their Eradicator brick, obviously, but they're not going to try and do that because they want to, or a solo Devilfish is there. They're going to put, one Eradicator, 2 Eradicators there to try and chip half of its damage, half of its wounds or more off, and then they're going to put the rest somewhere else so that the key unit doesn't proc this. Instead, in proc pinpoint counteroffensive, the full reroll strat, instead they'll finish it off with, a Dreadnought or something, whatever it is. And that means it's less effective to use your pinpoint counteroffensive. Or on the other hand, they will set it up, wound a bunch of your stuff in a turn, and then kill it all in a phase so that, okay, yeah, you can use the strat, but on one thing out of all the killing that's been done. Mont'Ka is stronger into threat overload armies, but if they kind of put most of their damage or most of their damage emphasis on missile broadsides or breachers and don't bring as many high AP multi-damage type of weapons, that has AP 2 or higher, then they're really relying on focused fire, and you can only pick 2 units to benefit from it each turn. And so because of that, if they have 2, 3 missile side units and just breachers, okay, yeah, the 2 units that use the strat are going to be amazing, but then the other 2 aren't quite as effective. So there are ways to still try and play around it, but there's going to be 2 deadly units, and then if the rest of the army is mostly AP 1 and stuff, it's not going to be as strong of a punch, which is why you see my list be a bit more varied than that. If you win the infiltration roll-off to deploy your infiltrators first, you can do a lot to slow down this archetype because they really want to scout move forwards, and if you infiltrate right there, even if you're trading that unit and stopping, because they're going to have either Pathfinders in the Devilfish and then scout broadsides and other stuff, or they're going to try and scout move those Devilfish off if they're using the Pathfinders and trying to actually use the recon infiltrate to block your infiltrators. If they lose the roll off, okay, well, unfortunately, you're not going to get as much value out of your scout moves, and you'll trade a resource for that. That's totally fine. But, it'll slow down. They're going to hit you turn 2, but they're not going to hit you turn 1. And that can be a big deal depending on deployment and the size of your army. Tau also have still not too many ways to fall back and shoot. Riptides can, Ghost Keels can, the Star Scythe Crisis Suits can, but not too many units can realistically do it. And so if you're able to tie up their units away from the firing angles or at very narrow ones where you can avoid them, then they're going to be stuck there. They can either fall back or they can stay there if they're vehicles and just shoot into the combat, but they'll lose turns of value. And that's something that's very powerful against Tau and can give you a winning edge. And then most lists are going to run tons of Bring It Down. So if you're a person who likes fixed and Bring It Down homers, very easy to get a good score on that against these lists. The problem is defending your primary is what you're going to have to focus on because this army contests it very well and kills you off objectives very well. So primary is going to be where Tau wants to beat you, so you need to find ways to mitigate their ability to interact with your primary. Questions and things to know. So much of the power of the detachment comes from the usage of strats, as I've mentioned. So you need to be aware of how many CP they have, if they're wasting CP rerolls on various things, or using some of the other strats inefficiently. Okay, they're not going to have the key combo plays that they really want to. So the strats really elevate this army for sure. There's going to be a lot of T3 bodies in this list, especially the breacher teams with Fireblades, and they're very vulnerable to torrent weapons. They can be -1 to wound from ranged attacks, which can help, but obviously losing 4 or 5 models is quite damaging to a breacher team that wants to hit you at full efficiency. You need to pre-measure their max movement ranges constantly, especially the Devilfish with breachers inside. because that threat range is so easy to contest a lot of objectives, you need to be aware of where they can go and block those spots so they can't contest. If they keep giving you 0s or 5s, you're going to be in for a really quite poor score differential, in my opinion. If you happen to chip down their cheap resources with your best units, by the time they engage you, they're going to have full rerolls on them. So you want to set up your own killing blow turns where, okay, I've chipped down a bunch of stuff, or I've just killed a bunch in a single phase, so that strat is less impactful, which is quite important. If they get full rerolls on all your key units, like it is going to be because you kill their cheap stuff with it. And their cheap stuff can be relatively durable. Like a Devilfish still requires some real thing to kill it. Although Nurglings killed one in the Chaos Demons game, so who actually knows? But like Piranhas and stuff, they're reasonably durable. A real unit will kill them, but then they proc the full rerolls from the stratagem. And then I always put this in here, but yes, this mentions all the plays that can be done. But as I said, a lot of these are CP intensive, or they have to be in specific spots on the board to pull them off. And so don't get overwhelmed by, oh my god, this army can do all these things. Be aware of, they can do these things. Now I need to check what position are they in to be able to do, how much CP do they have to be able to pull off these plays, and then think about how best you can mitigate that positioning that they make. So here's a sample Mont'Ka list. This is one I'm going to be playing on stream pretty soon up against Quentin Zaldari. And I think it's a nice mix. I played 2 games already. This is the 3rd game. So I've played a very a Riptide heavy build at the beginning. And then I played a very no Riptides with broadsides in them. And now this is kind of the balance between those lists. So continue to experiment, but I think I've refined it down to a pretty strong core. And I'm excited to get this one on the table and see how it performs. But it's Commander Farsight. He is really good for getting that second aggressive mobility and having a rapid ingress threat. I think you could totally go for 2 missile side units instead, or a heavy rail and a missile side unit. But I think having a rapid ingress threat is also very strong. I think that's terrain dependent, matchup dependent, teams dependent versus singles. So also Farsight is such a cool model. Like I want to keep running him because this is his detachment. He is the master of the killing blow. So I love running Farsight, and he's quite good. So he's in here. He's the warlord. 3 Fireblades. They go in the breacher teams. Give them +1 attack to their ranged weapons. So if you bring gun drones on your breachers, the gun drone gets +1 attack, and then their pulse blaster will get +1 attack as well. So 10 breachers will put 30 shots out, and then 3 shots from their gun drone. Then the Fireblade will shoot 3 of his pulse rifle shots, or his hot shot pulse rifle, whatever it's called. And then he'll have 2 gun drones with him. Each will go from 2 shots to 3. So he himself puts out 9 shots, and then the breacher team puts out 33 shots. It's a very strong shooting activation, specifically when you get real wounds, whether they're on an objective or you disembark from a transport and you pop +1 AP. They're very good into a lot of targets. Darkstrider here, that 12-inch no-go zone, is very strong against armies that have 3.1 away, and Tau don't like any of that, so he's a critical resource in my opinion for denying that. 40 breachers, you could totally go for more. I have gone for more in the past. I think 30 is the bare minimum that I would run in this detachment. 40 means I have a 10-man squad that I can trade at some point and not be too sad about it, because the Fireblade squad isn't outrageously pricey, but it's still not something that I want to throw away willy-nilly. So I have a squad I can just throw away and not really care. If there's like a wounded thing that I just need to kill and I don't want to commit any extra firepower, I'll send them up, grenades, shoot at it, kill it, and then that's a cheap kill. 10 Pathfinders with their recon drone to infiltrate and scout. 2 Devilfish here, you could totally run more. I have run more in the past. 2, you can very easily hide, and you can use the scout move on them and do all sorts of things. You can even start the Pathfinders in one of them. 3, very possible to hide, but gets a little tight. And then 4 plus is quite difficult on a lot of boards, although not every board, obviously. And then some boards have staging points for them, other boards don't. And so if you run a ton of them, you kind of like jam up your own like staging routes, and it's better just to have more damage. So I think on certain GW boards, like the layout I played against the Custodes, that's the worst board for staging. You can stage on one side, but you can't stage on the other, which is very annoying for contesting their objectives every turn. If there was a second staging point, I would have contested those objectives every turn, and I would have picked that as Strategic Conquer, but because there was no staging point there, it was a lot harder to pull off some of the plays I otherwise would be able to on the other deployments and boards. So that one's a little bit of an outlier. That's layout 4 on GW terrain. The other ones, it's awesome. You can run more Devilfish and be totally fine. So 2 is the minimum I would run, but you can run more if you want. 2 Tetra teams, you can run less. You can run all 3, like I did in the previous list, but 2 is perfectly reasonable. Before you start proccing pinpoint counteroffensive, you have the ability to get full rerolls on your key activations, and that's fantastic. 3 Sunforged Battlesuits, which Farsight is going to go inside, gives them +1 to wound when they're within 9 inches, and they're going to want to be close to get Melta. This unit with reroll wounds and damage against monsters and vehicles really does quite a bit of damage. If you're an enemy vehicle without an invuln, sayonara, you're dead. Just accept that you're dead, and then the unit is not that easy to kill in return. You can -1 damage them in shooting, and Farsight's 8 wounds now, 4 up invuln, 2 up save, and then the Crisis Suits are 5 wounds apiece at 4 up invuln. That's, yeah, you can get through it, but it's going to take quite a dedication, especially if there's a -1 damage involved. And then Farsight is decent enough in combat. If you throw like total trash into the unit, he can actually punch there out, because the +1 to wound is actually just attacks within 9, not ranged attacks, so it works in his combat as well. And the basic fist of the Crisis Suits. 3 Riptides, they're just a consistent platform. They're consistent by having 3 of them, excuse me. 1 is not consistent, 2 is not consistent, 3 is where you start to get consistent value out of them. They're not going to kill 3 things in a turn, although you could get lucky and it could happen, but in general they'll be able to focus fire something down. Haha, focus fire. Then it's relatively points efficient for their durability. Their damage can swing, but they're very good into elite infantry, which is really why I'm running them here. They would have helped massively into Custodes, but I know that they're the best thing that Tau has into Custodes, and I wanted to try other options. So they will certainly be back in the list. If you watch the Chaos Demons game, they were awesome, can really be interacted with efficiently. If you do have shooting activations and -1 damage one of them, like they're not getting through that. So it's just a great unit. And then 3 Missile Sides. I was really impressed with them. They do kind of hog the flat 6 advance, which is a little annoying because using it on Breachers or Farsight can just use it on his unit whenever, but using it on Breachers is very powerful as well. So I think some archetypes might not run the broadsides specifically for that reason and focus more on the primary denial of the Breachers. But if you're a damage type of fella, or if you're playing against somebody who prefers damage and is a Tau player, they're probably going to run the broadside unit. And like I said, there's that nice synergy between Breachers up close, broadsides in the back, both get +1 AP, activate the far back first, and then the Breachers can finish it off as needed. So I think this is a pretty balanced Mont'Ka list. It's got good amount of mission play, good amount of tools, and then has quite a few damage dealers. You can go heavier on the damage dealers, you can go heavier on the mission play. I think there's a lot of opportunity in this detachment, and there's things that I haven't been running, like the Trail Shaper with the Farstalkers, that's also very good. So there's a lot, like you can have a Mont'Ka list with your own playstyle and use very different units from me, from other Tau players, and still feel great about it. And I think they just nailed this detachment. Whoever wrote this, I want your name because you deserve to be praised. You seriously need to be praised. So, and I'm here to give that praise. And I know you don't hear that often because I play some other armies like Admech where there's zero praise going out to whoever wrote that. But whoever wrote this did a fantastic job and deserves it. And I'm just really happy for this army. Now, obviously, this is Know Thy Enemy, and I'm talking from the Tau perspective because I know this army. But if you're playing against this, it is going to be a pain in the butt because it's an extremely powerful detachment with great rules, and it's a player skill army. It is just great players are going to get tremendous value out of this detachment, and even a okay Tau player is still going to get good value because the baseline rules are very accessible and very obvious in how to use them. Now, aggressive mobility, there's a lot of not obvious ways to use it, but that's where the player skill aspect, like flat 6 advance is just good baseline, and any player will recognize that and use it if they need to. But then the great players are going to take that and pull off crazy move blocks and objective contest plays and stuff that you didn't see coming. And that's why I think this detachment is so good, because average players they can play it and they're going to get great results from it. But then great players can take it and actually fight against some of the best armies in the game. And I think this detachment can do that. So you're going to see it, and you need to be prepared for it. So hopefully this was a good breakdown that you found interesting. And like I said, there's plenty of games showing off the Mont'Ka list, and check those out to see it in action. Thank you so much for joining me. Hope you enjoyed this one. If you have questions, go ahead and tag me in the Discord in the Know Thy Enemy section, and I'd be happy to answer them. So long for now. Appreciate everybody's continued support, and I'll see you next time for more content. So long for now.